Secondary prevention of a concussion is about developing strategies after an injury occurs. Although participation in sport does come with inherent risks surrounding accidents and injuries, sport governing bodies' role in mitigating these risks are often seen through the creation of codes of conduct, policy, and protocols.
We know that injuries can happen in sports and accidents can happen anywhere. So it's important to understand what those protocols are and really preparing us for those kinds of codes of conduct where we talk about what's acceptable, what's not, and having an honest dialogue about the risks and what is a tolerable risk and what is not.
Understanding the critical role of sport governing bodies in establishing proper safety measures and guidelines is an essential aspect of preventing an injury like a concussion from happening in the first place. But in order to ensure we create these strategies properly, we must first gain a deeper understanding of the inherent risks associated with sport and how these risks are embedded in traditional sport culture that spans multiple generations.
We still have this sort of culture of risk and this culture of risk-taking that doesn't really align with this idea of keeping athletes safe. And sometimes that's pressures from coaches to perform. But it can be, it can be the athlete's own motivations too, because realistically in sport, at a lot of levels, that's what we value. We value performance. And so that comes with an inherent risk for getting concussions and then playing through said concussions.
The value of performance that Mike refers to is one of the biggest adversaries to concussion prevention, as athletes tend to believe struggle and enduring pain is a necessary part of attaining peak performance, which can create a problematic understanding of what it means to experience a concussion in sport.
On the same side, we're saying, well, don't push through that too much, but like you can here. So it's this kind of like tension that exists within sport where it's like, yeah, do this, but not that much. And then with concussions, the fact that it's invisible makes it even more complicated because nobody can see that. You can't measure that necessarily.
The challenge that comes with this invisible nature of a concussion Mike describes is that there is an element of self-diagnosis required for a concussion, and athletes may end up withholding information related to the symptoms they are experiencing as a result of how they are taught to endure through pain.
There's this thing called the pain principle, where athletes assume that when they're playing sport, they are going to endure pain. And so that can influence the way that they look at risks in sport because they're understanding that I am going to get hurt almost inevitably because I'm playing sport. And it's that inherent risk component that doesn't align with the concussion.
This acceptance of pain is often understood as the embodiment of the athlete identity. But as Ryan mentions, the complex nature of our brains doesn't align with this mentality, and playing through pain can be very harmful in the context of a concussion.
When athletes sustain a concussion, they treat it the same as any other injury. And so there's different considerations for a concussion because first and foremost, it is a brain injury. But secondly, it is invisible. Nobody can see it. Therefore, it's very hard to validate it. It's like, is this person really hurt or are they just faking it? Those are the type of things that can kind of come up when an athlete is being socialized to tough things out. So when an athlete actually sustains a concussion, they question what they're going through, they doubt their own injury, and then this can lead to mental health complications, this can lead to feeling of isolation. They become worried about what other people are going to think.
On top of this, there is an element of fear that can also be experienced throughout the recovery process. And this state of fear comes in different stages, each with the power to influence the decisions made by athletes.
So when an athlete's going back into play after sustaining a concussion, they're susceptible to a lot of forms of fear. Like when they're going back, they could be fearing re-injuring themselves.
There's often a shaken confidence that comes with injury and returning to sport. If people aren't feeling confident out there, they can really put themselves at risk of re-injury. A water skier who needs to go off a big jump, or a freestyle skier barreling down the hill, if they don't have their confidence and their skills back, that's pretty dangerous for that athlete or participant.
You also may be fearing losing your spot on your team. That's a very common one for people. So they actually want to get back to sports sooner and rush the return process because they are actually trying to get back to their position on the team or fulfill their role so they aren't losing that kind of social element.
Hard to see all your friends having fun and you're kind of just like on the sidelines, just not able to do anything. So, and I'm very competitive, so not being able to like be on the ice and like be like, oh, I could do that, I could have done this for the team or that for the team was hard, definitely.
You get so excited because you can see the field, you're on the sidelines, like doing your return to play and stuff, and you see the girls out there like passing the ball and everything, and you just want to be part of it so bad.
Another source of fear is being perceived as weak by your peers. So what other people are thinking of you can actually dictate a lot of the concussion recovery, because you just want to be there with your teammates. You want to pretend like everything's normal because you look normal, right?
And you kind of get weird looks from other people of like, does she just not want to be here? Like, it's taking the easy way out type thing. But it's like knowing deep down that you can't be in that situation and knowing what's better for long term.
You're seen as weak if you've got a headache and you've got a concussion and you can't go here, you can't go there. People kind of see it as weak.
Again, it's tied to mental health quite extensively, and this process where there's an internal conflict in that return to play process, it's very complex because mental health can be really intertwined with it as well.
My anxiety and depression started to take over, and I started to value that over my health, which was one of the biggest mistakes I made. But as a teenager, it was a really hard thing to choose my health first. So I did, unfortunately, I did tell doctors that I was feeling better and that I was ready to get back to hockey. So they cleared me, and I got hit again, and that was the end of any sport for me.
The nuances derived from fear plays a significant role in one's recovery journey, and it also adds to the overall complexities of creating preventative strategies once an athlete is confirmed to have sustained a concussion. Over the years, though, we have been able to create more proactive approaches based on research throughout the recovery stage.
In 2017, when the last consensus statement on concussion in sport was published, an updated gradual return to sport and return to school process was published with the document, and that really laid out the gradual approach that we use now.
Having a gradual return to activities has been proven to be very beneficial for concussion recovery, which means that the previous strategies we used to have in place for managing a concussion were actually counterintuitive to the healing process.
We have come a long way in our understanding of what helps support a person's recovery from their injury after concussion. Many people probably picture what we used to do, where people were sent to a dark room, some people call it bedroom jail, and thought the only way to support the brain was to let it rest kind of in the dark and in the quiet for days and potentially weeks on end. And what research has actually shown is only an initial period of rest is beneficial. After that, there is such thing as too much rest. For one thing, people become too still, too isolated. So it affects the ability of their brain to recover, but also, mentally and socially is not healthy for people to be isolated while they're recovering.
The unfortunate truth is that it often takes years for the research to catch up with the current standard of protocols being set at a national level. So even though we have made strides in our concussion prevention strategies, there's still a need for a more comprehensive approach that considers multiple aspects related to the individualistic nature of concussions.
I think one thing to note for anybody who is going through the return to play protocol is that as much it is a step-by-step basis, you have to acknowledge that it's a non-linear path to get through those steps. So it's not always going to be, I'm going to get through all of these in the timeline that I'm told. You don't know what the process is going to be like. It's very unique to each individual who sustains it.
What we want to avoid is people pushing too hard and kind of having this roller coaster of crashing and back down, but more so maintaining a level of activity where they can handle it.
To those who have sustained an injury and are wondering sort of what steps are next, it starts by telling someone. And so don't cut yourself off from your support systems. Obviously, consult with your doctor, consult with your parents or whoever as part of that sort of support network. We know now that return to play involves a little bit of activity once you kind of get through that acute phase and you start getting back into things, and that you can't do that from a room. But my advice would be not to cut yourself off.
Secondary prevention is about addressing the injury after it occurs. And to do that, we need to create evidence-based strategies that helps reduce the level of risk associated with re-injury, creating clear social reintegration pathways for athletes, programs built for athletes' mental health, support system education, and a proactive approach to an athlete's overall return to play pathway.